Ever feel like you're just running on empty, like totally drained, nothing left in the tank? Yeah, we've all been there. It's called burnout, and it's way more common than you might think. We're going to dig into that today.
Definitely a topic a lot of people can relate to.
Totally. And to help us unpack it, I've got an expert joining me. We're doing a deep dive on this article by Marcus. He's a tech VP, a dad, and get this, a content creator too. So he's got this really interesting perspective on burnout.
Sounds like he's juggling a lot.
Yeah, exactly. And his article is all about hitting that wall and then figuring out how to bounce back. But before we get into his story, I got to share this crazy stat. Deloitte did this survey, right? And it turns out a whopping 77% of workers say they've experienced burnout.
Wow, 77%.
Yeah.
That's a lot of people.
Right. Makes you wonder what's going on. But anyway, in the article, Marcus lays out these three big signs of burnout. Starts with the obvious one, feeling totally wiped out, exhausted. But then he gets into like your work actually taking a hit, you're not as productive. And then maybe the trickiest one, this feeling of just disconnecting from your work.
Yeah, it's like you're there, but you're not really there. And those signs, they can be sneaky. Like exhaustion doesn't always mean you're downing coffee all day. It could be just feeling super impatient or dreading the day, that kind of thing.
Oh, that's a good point. I hadn't thought about it like that. What about that productivity dip? What's that look like day to day?
Well, imagine missing deadlines you usually hit no problem.
Yeah.
Or making dumb mistakes you'd never make normally.
Mm.
Could even be that everything just feels harder, takes way longer. Those are all red flags.
Okay, yeah. And then there's that detachment thing.
Right, it's like you just don't care as much anymore. Might be dreading tasks you used to love or feeling cynical about the whole thing. Like, does any of this even matter? And that's what Marcus is saying. We had to catch those signs early, not just write them off as a bad week.
Which is exactly what happened to him, right? I mean, here's a guy, VP at a tech company, has kids, but then he's also got this YouTube channel he's super passionate about. That's where the burnout really smacked him.
Yeah, and content creation, that's a whole other beast. Constantly churning out new stuff, staying relevant, keeping your audience engaged, the algorithms. It's a lot of pressure.
No kidding. And there's actually data on this. Over 65% of content creators say they've dealt with burnout. So it's not just you if you're listening and you're in that world.
Not at all. And that's what's so useful about Marcus's experience. He actually did something about it. Came up with this 3-step plan. Recognize, recover, re-engage.
And we've kind of touched on the recognize part, right? Seeing those burnout signs. But recover, that's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah, because he went all in on recovery. Decided to take a full 6 weeks off from content creation. Cold turkey.
6 weeks. Wow. That takes guts when you're used to, powering through. That must have been tough to actually do.
It was definitely a choice to put his well-being first over, like, being productive. But the really interesting part is what he did with that time.
So 6 weeks off, right. Big decision. But then what's he actually doing during that time?
Get this. He threw himself into painting Warhammer 40K miniatures.
Whoa. Okay, not what I was expecting. Gotta ask, what's takeaway there? Seems kind of random.
It's all about active rest. That's key for burnout, and people miss it. It's not enough to just stop working. You got to do stuff you actually enjoy, stuff that refills your tank instead of draining it.
So not just collapsing on the couch for 6 weeks straight.
Exactly. Could be anything, really. Maybe for you, it's gardening or playing music or woodworking even. It's got to be something that really clicks for you, lets you use a different part of your brain.
Makes sense. Giving your mind a break from the usual grind. Maybe rediscovering something you used to love.
Right. And it's worth pointing out, Marcus didn't just do the miniatures. He also made sure to fit in other self-care stuff. Cold plunges, lifting weights, getting enough sleep, that kind of thing.
It's that mind-body connection, right? Easy to neglect your physical health when you're burned out, but it makes a huge difference.
Huge. Like laying a good foundation so you can actually rebuild.
So he's rested, recharged, got a whole army of painted miniatures. What's the next phase? He calls it re-engage.
Okay, so this is where it gets really cool.
Yeah.
Marcus found this whole concept super popular these days, especially for creative types. Slow productivity. Heard of it?
Yeah, it's about ditching that whole always on, do more faster mentality, trying to find a way to work that's actually sustainable, right?
Exactly. Realizing that your worth isn't tied to how much you crank out, but the quality and the thought you put into it.
And Marcus specifically mentions that Cal Newport guy, right? The deep work guy.
Yeah, that book's been huge for changing how people see their work habits. It's about focusing on deep, meaningful work instead of just bouncing between a million shallow tasks. which totally lines up with the whole slow productivity thing.
So how does that actually work in real life? Like slowing down sounds great, but how do you actually do that when it feels like the world's just getting faster and faster?
$1 million question, right? That's where most people get tripped up. Marcus breaks slow productivity down into three things: doing less, but doing it better, avoiding multitasking, and this idea of mindful commitment.
Let's break those down a little, starting with do less but better. What's that actually look like?
It's about figuring out your most important tasks, the stuff that really makes a difference, and giving those your full attention. Learning to say no to distractions so you can focus on quality over quantity.
Quality over quantity, focus over frenzy. I like it.
Right. And then there's multitasking, which gets a bad rap, but we got to talk about it. People wear it like a badge of honor, but our brains just aren't wired for it.
We think we're being so efficient, but really we're just all over the place, making more mistakes.
Exactly. Every time you switch gears, it costs you, focus-wise. Your brain's fragmented. You end up taking longer on each thing.
Makes total sense. So, slow productivity says one thing at a time, full focus.
Right. And lastly, that mindful commitment piece, honestly, might be the most important of all.
How so?
Because it's about your actions matching up with your values, choosing how you spend your time and energy, and then setting boundaries to protect them.
Being intentional about what you say yes to, even if it means saying no to some other stuff, right? Even if it's tough.
Exactly. It's about saying yes to the things that light you up and no to the ones that drain you, even if it means maybe disappointing someone or not buying into that always-on pressure.
That's a tough one to break free from, but sounds crucial if you're going to actually beat burnout long term.
It is. Takes conscious effort, to look at your priorities, set those boundaries, but the payoff is huge for your well-being, for the actual work you do.
And it sounds like that's what Marcus found going through all this. Came out the other side with a whole new outlook and a totally different way of approaching his creative work.
Totally. He embraced a slower pace, became more deliberate, set realistic goals for himself, stopped putting so much pressure on every single video being this viral hit.
That must have been so freeing to let go of that need for perfection, just enjoy creating again.
Absolutely. And he learned to cut himself some slack, too. No more beating himself up over missed deadlines or if something wasn't perfect.
So important. We're so hard on ourselves sometimes, setting these impossible standards just fuels the burnout. Got to give yourself permission to be human, make mistakes, prioritize your well-being.
Couldn't agree more. Oh, and before we wrap up, I thought it was interesting. Marcus mentions getting some professional help, too.
Yeah, he talked about using BetterHelp, that online therapy platform.
And I think that says a lot. There's still such a stigma around mental health, but talking to a therapist, a counselor, it can be so helpful, whether it's burnout, anxiety, depression, anything you're dealing with.
It's brave to admit you need help. Reach out. Not weak at all.
Not at all. It's putting your mental health first, just like your physical health.
So, as we wrap up here, any big takeaways you hope listeners are walking away with from Marcus's story?
I think it's a really powerful reminder that anyone can get burned out, even super successful, driven people. It's not a sign of failure. It's a sign to slow down, reassess, and make some changes.
It's about catching those warning signs early, taking action before you hit that wall, putting your well-being first, finding those things you love to do, and finding a way to work that's actually sustainable.
Exactly. And maybe a question for your listeners to think about. What are your Warhammer miniatures? What are those activities that spark your creativity, refill your energy, and help you reconnect with yourself?
Ooh, that's good. Got to figure out what those things are and make time for them, not just as a burnout fix, but as a way to live a more meaningful, fulfilling life overall.
100%. Finding those outlets for self-expression, for rejuvenation, it's not just a nice to have, it's essential for our well-being, for how we work, for how we live.